I think everybody that I talked to enjoyed the regatta, but it raised a whole bunch of questions once we got finished with it. So the objectives, the things that I want to hope to stick in your mind today. Hang on just a second. So these are the objectives that I had in mind for tonight, which is to understand the factors that may have influenced the weather during the full moon regatta, because it wasn't what any of us that were out there expected. Then to understand the benefits of shortening sail in heavy winds. I don't think anybody out there did that to any extent, but I want to go over that. Talk about how to shorten sail with boats. Understand the factors that minimize the chance of crew members going overboard. Understand the need to minimize the distance from the overboard crew member if someone does go overboard, and understand how to recover an overboard crew member using what's called the quick stop method. So there's only a few people in here, a few people online, so if you have any questions or want to add anything, please do so. Several of the people in the room were there during the race and probably have some insights on some of these different things, and I think it would be worthwhile to share those. So what happened during the full moon regatta? We expected very light wind, and that's how it started out. And we got very light air, but then it went up to 20 to 30 knots after the sun went down, which was a totally unexpected thing for anybody that I've talked to about the race. And so, why did this happen? Well, Hooper, our weather guy, said it's because the weather didn't read the forecast. I thought that was hilarious. I had to use his line. But so many times, people I've talked to and I have found that the weather forecast and the weather that we actually have are two completely different things. But I got together with Hooper a week or so ago, and we talked about some of the factors that went into this, and I want to go over them with you so that you'll be aware of what they were and how we got into this situation, and so that you'll be on the lookout for it before. So on the North Shore, we had light winds at the start, and that's what everybody expected. And so when we look at what the weather systems that were involved with this are, we were in a big area of high pressure. The forecast predicted low wind, but if you looked at the different weather apps, like I looked at windy, wind alert, sail flow, those kinds of things, they showed the wind in different directions. But when I was driving to the boat to get on it, I heard on the radio a weather forecaster say that there was a chance of afternoon thunderstorms. And we really didn't get afternoon thunderstorms, and I think I even looked at my radar to see if there was anything nearby, and there wasn't. So why do we have the north winds, the southerly winds at the start on the North Shore? And it's not because of the overall weather picture, it's because of the local effects of the lake. The big picture was that we were in a big high pressure area and there was very little air movement. That's why everything was showing a sort of different area. But what we had, we also had distance thunderstorms to the west. After dark, we could see lightning, but I never heard any thunder, and I don't know that anybody did, because those thunderstorms were 25 or more miles to the west of us. So what Hooper said, and this makes a lot of sense, is that the breeze that we got at the start of the race was this effect here, where over the middle of the lake, because the water's cooler than the land late in the afternoon, we have sinking air, and then when we get closer to the land, we have air coming in because it's rising off of the land. This is the same sea breeze that you see every afternoon along the Gulf Coast, but since the lake's a lot smaller, this is a much smaller effect, but I think that this was one of the things that was contributing to the wind that we had. And this is a picture of what moonrise looked like on that evening. This is from Wind Nuts. I think Danielle took this picture, and it shows flat water, a little bit of haziness. There's the moon. And then the next picture that I have here shows it a little bit later on, I think also from Wind Nuts. And you can see the reflection of the moon on the water. Still, it's still fairly light, and there's no bad stuff in the distance. What happened next was that the wind filled from the west and quickly, very quickly, increased in speed. Al, do you remember about how long it was from when the wind started until it picked up?
Yeah, it was within 5 to 10 minutes. It went from 5 knots to 16 knots to 28 knots and held.
Brian, was that what you remember?
Yeah, pretty much.
And that's the same thing. And you?
That's about what we had to do.
Yeah, all the boats pretty much had that. And I recorded my boat's position on the Navionics app, and I went and looked back at it, and it was right around a little bit after 8 o'clock that this happened, right after sunset. And I could see the boat's speed go from 2 knots to 5 knots to 7 knots in just a short distance. So why did we get all of that wind? So at sunset, you'd expect the winds to die down. But that was, and that you'd have the formation of what along the Gulf Coast would be the land breeze, but that's not what we had. The wind was coming from the distant thunderstorms as they dissipated. And what I have here is just what everyone said. Around 8:15, we had sustained winds of 15 knots or more, which ended up being 20 to 30 knots. Over on the left-hand side of this picture is a cell phone image that Danielle took on her phone. Up here at the top it says 8:22, and this is an 8:15 p.m. radar picture that she had on her phone. So you can see here is where we were. Way over here you see some pretty strong thunderstorm activity, but there's a big area here that looks kind of weak. This was probably a powerful thunderstorm that dissipated, and we got the wind from it. The picture on the right shows the makeup of a thunderstorm, and you've probably seen a lot of this before. A thunderstorm is a huge heat engine. Water evaporates off the ground, and it has heat energy. It comes up, and it starts to condense. But when it condenses, all the energy that was taken out of it to turn it from water vapor into water goes into heating this thing up even more. And then as the water vapor still continues to rise, or the water, and it freezes up in the top of this thing up at 20 or 30,000 feet, even more energy is extracted from it, so it just keeps building and building. And the thunderstorm has to have an updraft to fuel it, and this is how tornadoes get formed, is from violent updrafts. And then there's going to be a down cycle too, and there's a complete cycle in this thing. But eventually, there's not enough energy going into it to keep it up there, and everything that's in there collapses. And it can collapse very violently, and it causes a thing that's called a gust front or an outflow boundary, and you can see that on radars sometimes. Not the radars that we have a lot of times, but on Doppler radars that haven't been smoothed out to make the video look different. This is the outflow boundary from a collapsing thunderstorm, and this is the line where the gusty wind is moving out from it. I tried to put a video on here, but it comes from Twitter, and I couldn't download it. So what would happen is that this would start in the center, be a little bitty circle, and it would keep moving out very quickly, and where it hits is where you get the high winds. And then as this thing continues to dissipate, all of that energy gets released, and it keeps coming at you until it's finished. And ours lasted almost 2 hours, I think, or more than 2 hours. It was a long time. Here's another picture that shows the, this works. It shows the downdraft coming from the thunderstorm vertically, hitting the ground, and then going horizontally out. And that's what we got. I remember someone telling me that they could see ripples on the water as this was coming, and they just kept getting more pronounced, and then all of a sudden we got hammered. Here's another picture that shows the same effect sort of in a side view. You've got the downdraft coming out, it curls up around here, and you've got some hot air going back in, but mostly what we had was just the downdraft from the whole thing collapsing. A lot of the Doppler radars can pick up this place where there's all this disturbance, and that's what we saw with that circle on the slide a few minutes ago.
So I have a question. Do you think because we were at sunset, so you really, the heat of the day was starting to dissipate, that you really didn't have a lot of heat flowing back up, and so it just blew itself out?
That could be part of it, but when we go back and look at Danielle's slide of the actual radar over here, you can see that there's still some powerful thunderstorms. Why, if this is the one, and I'm just guessing that this is the one that gave us the energy because it's closest and it's no longer has big red tops, it may have lost energy because of that. It may have lost energy going over Lake Maurepas. It could have gained energy. I'm not a meteorologist. I don't know the answer to that, but it's I can't explain it. But the thing is, since having experienced this, I will now be on the lookout for.
Yeah, because that wasn't even close to us.
It wasn't. When you measure the distance, it was 25 miles to the edge of that.
Wow.
If you go back to that, go back about 2 slides. One more. That one. I mean, where you have the blue purplish arrows coming down. No.
Oh, over here.
Over here. I mean, if you look at that, this thunderstorm was to the left of us.
Mm-hmm.
That, okay, your upward arrow, the circular pattern. Okay.
You're talking about this.
We were in there.
Well, we were actually out
Well,
here.
yeah, further
Yeah,
up, but
yeah.
proportionately, yeah. But basically, that's what we were getting.
Yes.
That collapsing.
And it makes sense because land's gonna hold heat longer than water.
Yeah.
So when the sun set and the heat dissipated, you had an immediate cooling because it's over the water.
Yeah, I mean, that all probably contributed to it.
Yeah, well, actually, the land's going to give up heat and warm up earlier than the water.
Okay.
But we don't know why this happened. But the whole point, the whole takeaway from this, for me, is that a 25-mile-away thunderstorm can produce enough wind to cause me problems. And so I think that for all of us, that's an important takeaway. When I first got my boat and started looking at the weather real close here, I had an app that hooked up to Weather Underground, and it would show the New Orleans airport Doppler radar, and it would actually show those rings that I showed in this picture. And I can remember being out on the lake sailing by myself. There were some thunderstorms in New Orleans. I looked at the radar image at that time on a BlackBerry, and I saw one of these things headed for me. It was still on the New Orleans side, but I took down the main, I got everything ready, and sure enough, 10 minutes later, I was in 20 knots of wind. But I could see it there. The radar images that I have on my phone now don't show that, so there's no way that I know how to get that early warning. I'm going to try and figure out a way to get the other radar because the weather people have it, and I just think it would be useful to have.
Hooper wants to add that the radar is all about reflectivity. The red shows high rainfall that can be present as a storm collapses. The lighter rain is the edge of the same storm complex.
Well, thanks. And Hooper's given 2 really fine presentations on weather things. We're working right now on getting those loaded up to our YouTube channel. And I encourage you to take a look at them because I think they're really, really helpful. So what effect did this have on the regatta? Well, 1/3 of the North Shore boats dropped out of the race. Half of the non-spinnaker boats and one of the spinnaker boats, because one of the boats didn't have sail problems but had a GPS problem and didn't want to go headed in towards the land in that weather without having a reliable GPS. Everyone seemed to enjoy the race. They thought it was an exhilarating thing. There were no damage reports that I heard of to boats as a result of the wind. I heard about a crab trap being drug around the lake, and that might not have happened had the storm not been there. And I haven't heard of any major injuries. So I think in some ways we were lucky that it turned out really well, and that no one got hurt or anything like that. So two of the people that sailed in the race had boats, one's next to mine and one's a couple of ones down, and we were all talking Sunday or someday about all of this stuff, and everyone thought, in a way, we dodged a bullet with this, because it could have been worse. And then everyone said, you know, I learned something from this, and there were things I normally would have done but didn't do because, for one reason or the other, because we thought it was going to be so light.
Yes.
So we thought on the Corinthian side that this would be a good time to have a discussion about all of this stuff, just to share this sort of thing with everybody so that you could think about what happens when you go out on the lake, and maybe you should be ready in your mind and have your boat rigged that if the breeze does all of a sudden pick up to 30 knots, you can control the boat. Whether it means take all the sails down, whether it means reef them, roll up the jib, roll up the main if you do that, but just have those things in mind so that you're not caught off guard. So what we have to do is be prepared to shorten sail. We're going to talk about that first, and then be prepared to respond to a crew overboard person. If you remember the Candid Camera show, it had a jingle at the beginning of when it started. It said, "When you least expect it, you're elected, you're the star today, smile, you're on Candid Camera." Well, that's how man overboard things happen. The person going overboard, and having twice been the person who did that, does not have any idea that they're about to go overboard. And can be doing things to prevent from going overboard, but then some external factor jumps in there and changes the whole situation. So just the idea that you're not going to go overboard because you're being very careful doesn't mean that, in my first case going overboard, that some 200-pound person is going to fall on me, knock me into the lifelines, and the lifelines are going to break. And this was out in the ocean. But I had a harness on and never got disconnected from the boat. LPRC last year, I was a tactician on the boat. We just set the spinnaker, still had the jib up. We rounded the windward mark. We were bearing away on a close reach. And on the foredeck, they were having trouble getting the jib down. So I went up to the foredeck to start helping the jib down, sitting in the middle of the boat, pulling it up, got it 2/3 of the way down. We took a little knockdown. So I moved further to windward so that I could grab onto the windward side if I needed to, pulled some more jib up, then we took a big knockdown. I started sliding, and I slid on top of all the sail that I brought in. And if you know how slippery sailcloth is on top of itself, it was like going down a slide, but I caught the lifelines as I went under, and someone pulled me back on board pretty quick. But neither of those times did I expect to get my feet wet or anything else. And I've been doing a lot of sailing, and we've got people that aren't that experienced that are more likely to get in a situation and go swimming when they don't want to. So that's something we're going to talk about also. So shortening sail in heavy weather is, well, first, are there any questions about the weather part that we talked about, or any other discussion about that?
The only thing that I saw on the radar was that LSU was under a weather delay, which was unusual for Baton Rouge. So I don't know if that was that same line coming through, because they were playing baseball. But that was the only thing on the radar,
Was that last weekend?
that was the full moon.
The full moon,
night.
okay. Yeah,
But that-
it
but
may have been the same thing.
But that's 90 miles,
Yeah, and I'll add something.
Yeah.
Short, I think that weather pattern came on us so fast. As a skipper, I was worried about people moving around the boat.
Yeah.
So I immediately set everybody to the rail, and kept one person down in the cockpit to just luff that, or keep that jib right above the luff, where it wasn't powered and it wasn't tearing itself apart, because it was on us quick.
It was, but if you, on Zoom, you didn't hear what Al just said about wind nuts. They came so quickly, and wind nuts is a 36-foot big boat. There's a lot of power in that boat when you've got that much breeze. Al did not want to send someone forward to do something with the sail under those conditions because of concern of them getting hurt or going overboard. And a bunch of people made the same decision. Albert Baquet on Risky Business decided to do that. I could have probably been happier if I'd taken the main down, but I didn't want anyone to go forward in that. And so that was a situation that we had to think about. And I think that that's the right decision to make. And the way that it turned out, everything was fine. But I'm going to think differently about how I approach nighttime races on the lake after this. And so,
And Skipper,
Yeah.
I think, and just to confirm that line of thinking, there were only 3 of us in my boat, one inexperienced, and we were up for a later evening. And, we went from, at the 5 or 6 to probably about 15, 16, and then everything. And at that point, it's everybody staying in the cockpit. Nobody on deck. And if you have a roll-in head sail, wonderful. But if you can roll it in, if you can. But you'd rather blow a sail out than somebody go overboard. It's just hunker down, stay in the cockpit, and kind of, okay, forget the race.
right,
Uh,
right.
I want to be safe.
If on Zoom you can't hear that, Brian Keating was saying that when the weather came up, it was quick, and he wanted everybody, like Al said, and I think the same thing on Risky Business, and same thing on my boat, is to keep the people in the cockpit or on the windward rail where they are safe. Don't send anybody forward, and if you tear a sail or something like that, that's a secondary concern to having somebody go over the side.
And looking at, the size and weight of the boats, my boat's 17,000 pounds. And those first couple of puffs, we had the rail in the water. There was water under deck.
I had the rail under on my boat
Yeah.
a couple of times.
It's wet, it's slippery.
Yeah, we were sailing 5-10 degrees off of dead into the wind and making headway 6-7 knots. It was that strong.
Yeah.
It was. So there's 2 schools of thought. I'm going to reef early when something like this is coming, so that I don't get into the position where now it becomes too rough to reef, or I'm going to leave everything up because I can play the boat, and in a race I can get more speed out of it if I leave all the sails up. But I want to go through a few things right here.
Let me just say one
Sure.
more thing too. Day and night. Daytime, you can see other boats. You can see boats upwind, down. You can see their reaction. You're looking
Yes.
to the wind, so you pick up an increment of time there that allows you to react ahead of that first pump. Nighttime, you lose it.
Well, Brian's made a very good point about the nighttime losing the ability to analyze the situation with the other boats. I had that problem on Undine. We were coming on starboard tack up to the mark at the causeway, but I saw all these boats rounding the mark and coming away from it on port tack, but I'm on the lee side and I see these giant Genoas up there, and the first thing is, I don't know if anybody sees me. I had the lights on, but I had no idea. So I bore away and sailed underneath all those boats very early, so that Because what I was afraid of, if I got close, that someone would bear away while I was trying to do something, we'd run into each other. So that was definitely a factor in all of this. The whole nighttime thing makes it more complex.
Whole different environment. And I'm not telling tales on anybody, but we rounded that mark, the North Shore mark, probably about 15, 20 seconds behind another boat was coming the other direction. That boat, I don't know who it was, went around the wrong way,
Well,
which complicated what I thought they were gonna do.
that's a complication, and we talked about that after the race. And I think that everyone seemed to be in agreement. The next time we do that race, we're going to decide which direction everybody goes before the start. Because a whole bunch of people complained, not only the confusion at the start where you had some boats starting on port tack to go one way, other ones starting on starboard tack, and we don't want to do that. So let me go through some things about shortening sail. Why would you want to do that? It reduces the heel angle. If your boat's heeling at 30 degrees, it's not going fast, and people slide around on deck. It balances the rig, and I'm going to show you a picture of that. It reduces weather helm on the boat. If you're steering with the wheel turned to all the way over the side just to keep the boat going straight, the rudder's putting a tremendous amount of drag on the boat, and you can get rid of that by reducing sail area. There's tremendous rigging loads that you have. Crew functionality is improved because everyone's not holding on for dear life. The boat becomes much more maneuverable. If you have to avoid other boats, round a mark, that sort of thing, if you're not overpowered, that's a lot easier and safer to do. And it also reduces the chance of a crew overboard situation. So when should you reef? If you think that maybe you should, it's probably too late. And that's kind of what happened to all of us that night. Someone said maybe they should have reefed when they saw it coming and while it was still calm. And I was actually in a race where that paid off tremendously. It was the Newport to Bermuda race, and we're sitting in just almost complete calm with the spinnaker up, and we can see the lights of about a dozen other boats. But we could see this big thunderstorm off on the horizon that was moving our way. And we were just barely moving along, at maybe 2 or 3 knots, and we decided, we're going to take the chute down, we're going to reef the main, and we're going to put up a small jib. And we did that. And the thing hit, and it was like it was the other night. Now what happened is, each of those other boats got ahead of us because they had their spinnakers up probably about 1 or 2 blocks. But then all of a sudden, we're looking ahead, and we see all these lights going down to leeward while these folks are scrambling to get their chutes down, boats under control and stuff like that. So we probably gained 1 or 2 miles by having decided early on to reef the boat and take the chute down. So there are some considerations like that, but those are things that sometimes you get it right and sometimes you don't. So the other thing is that this is blank on here, but the normal heel angle for a boat probably shouldn't exceed 25 or 30 degrees. I was looking that up, and there's a whole bunch of people that sail different boats different ways. And but for my boat, if I'm at 20 degrees of heel, that's way too much heel. I've got the rail in the water, and I don't want to be there. I've sailed boats where people do sail them. Smaller boats, like 30-foot, I used to sail the Shields, which is a keel boat, a very narrow keel boat. They don't reef it, and they just let the boat lay over. But everybody in the class is doing the same sort of thing. So you don't get an advantage by reefing over someone who doesn't reef. That's just what everybody does. Back when they sailed America's Cup in 12 meters, they didn't reef the 12 meters. They maybe changed sails, but they did the heel. We have the ability on most of our boats to reduce the thing, which generally makes us go faster. And so when you do reduce the heel angle, it improves the underwater shape of the hull. It reduces weather helm. It reduces leeway. The sails are no longer just dumping air instead of being giving you forward propulsion. It can be difficult or impossible to tack if you've got too much heel on. You're making so much leeway that your velocity made good to windward or the mark that you want to go to is dropped off. The boat may try and round up once it gets hit by big puffs. I've certainly been on a lot of spinnaker boats that do that. If you have excessive rudder angle, it causes drag. And on some boats, you have to worry about down flooding into the cockpit or maybe into the cabin and capsizing. We probably won't have any of those kinds of conditions in Lake Pontchartrain because they're usually aggravated by big waves, bigger than we would get. But those are some of the considerations. Now, how much wind force do you get on your sail? The force in pounds on a sail is the area of the sails, your total sail area divided by 1,000. Multiply that by about 2.5, and then multiply it by the wind speed squared. So what happens is, if you double the wind speed, the force on the boat and the rigging and on the main sheet goes up by 4. So from 5 knots to 10 knots, it goes up 4 times the load on the rigging. From 10 knots to 20 knots, it's gone up 8 times from what we had before. So that was what all of a sudden we were exposed to. So you want the...
Yeah, come on.
And this is in the handout.
Okay, I couldn't find it.
This note is, it's something I quickly looked up, but the important part here is it goes up proportional to velocity of the wind squared. Here's a picture of a boat in a class, I think, where they sail the boats. It's a small boat, a 25-foot boat, where they sail them with a lot of heel. But look at what the underwater of the boat looks like. You've got the whole starboard side buried in the water, and you have the port side underneath. So your hull shape goes from like this, this is the way you'd want to tow the boat if it was in still water and not under sail. So now you've got it in this kind of configuration over here, which adds a whole lot of resistance to it. And has anyone ever steered a kayak or canoe by leaning to one side or the other? I've done that a bunch, and the reason that happens is because the shape of the hull, which is perfectly symmetrical when you're level, becomes unsymmetric, and the side you're leaning to has now more curvature than the side that's partly out of the water. So that makes the boat turn in that direction. You can lean the other way and it'll go. That's what's happening on the boat. When we look back at this boat that's leaning over like that, all the curvature in the starboard side of the boat, the above waterline part, is now jammed into the water, trying to turn the boat into the wind. And on this side, there's nothing resisting anything. So this makes you fight the helm on the boat, plus you're making big waves and it slows down. So that is a reason why not to have excessive heel. I talked about the balance of the boat, and when all boats have a thing called the center of lateral resistance, and that is the center of the underwater cross-section of the boat. And if you grab the boat at the deck above the center of lateral resistance, you could pull it sideways. If you go forward to the center of lateral resistance and you pull on it, it'll twist towards you. If you go behind it, it'll twist. But if you pull it at the center of lateral resistance, it would go sideways, theoretically. The sail area should be balanced over the center of lateral resistance, except for one thing. The sail area's total center should be a little bit forward of the center of lateral resistance, because when the boat heels over, it starts to make that bow wave, which pushes it up to windward. So you want to have the center of the sails forward of that to push it back down. So on a nice day when your boat's balanced and you can just let go of the tiller and she'll sail herself to windward, that's because you have this sail area balanced over the center of lateral resistance and the bow wave effect. Here's a picture of a wind vane that's made like a sailboat, and you can see that the post, the pivot point, is way forward of where the center of lateral resistance would be. Because if it were at the center of lateral resistance, the thing would just turn sideways and wouldn't be a wind vane. But we don't want our boats to be wind vanes. So here's a quick drawing which shows when you reef the boat, two things happen. The center of lateral resistance, let's say you reef the main, you've reduced the sail area over here, so the center of all the sail area moves forward, which counteracts the bow wave. If you take down the jib, it's going to move the center of effort of all the sail area back, which will contribute to weather helm, but you've got less sail up. So how you do that depends on which kind of boat you're doing. So let's say that you don't shorten sail, but you just keep sailing. Well, then here's some things that you can do. Let's say the situation we had where you decide that it's unsafe to send people forward and you're just going to sail this thing out. Well, feathering is what Al was talking about, where when the puffs hit, or when all the time you sail the boat higher than you normally would, it depowers the jib, and the boat, it has ample room to go the speed that you're going, ample force, but this keeps it from heeling over as far, and it keeps it from the puffs being as hard. You can ease the traveler or the main sheet down in the puffs and trim it back in the lulls if you want, or you can just ease it down, ease the boom vang off, and let a bunch of the air spill out of the sail.
We dumped the main.
You dump the main,
Completely.
and so you were just sailing on the
Just
jib.
on that jib.
So-
Right above the luff.
So if we go back to this idea of center of effort, lateral resistance, you move the center of effort way forward, which pushed the bow back down, main's completely loose, and that made it easier for you to steer the boat, and probably made the boat go through the water better. You can move the jib, if you were racing and it wasn't extreme, you can move the jib lead aft to put more curvature into the jib, and that'll help, or you can ease the boom vang also. When I was looking at this, there were a bunch of questions of which sail you should do first, and there are some people that have real strong opinions on that. And after looking at this, I think it depends on the boat, the point of sail you're on, and the urgency. If the headsail is large compared to the mainsail, like Al's boat, he has a high aspect mainsail and a huge jenny. He may want to reduce the size of the jenny, roll it up some, or go to a smaller sail so that there's more balance between the main and the jib. If you have a big mainsail, like a J30, compared to a relatively small jib, then reefing the main, if you do that, will help shift the balance back to where it should be. But if necessary, do whichever one is easier. If in the kind of conditions that we were in, it might be a whole lot easier to go reef the main than it would be to change a headsail, because that means you have to put one or two people up on the bow and fight with the sails and all that wind, which would be kind of crazy. But Al basically made that decision. I'm going to drive the boat on the jenny, and I'm going to let the main luff completely. And that way he minimized the amount that he was overpowered. So we can reduce the mainsail size by slab or jiffy reefing, which most boats have. Some boats, newer boats, now they're probably 20 years old or so, have got roller furling mains. And I don't have a boat with a roller furling main, and never will if it's a boat that I'm going to sail in the ocean with, because I'm worried about the roller furling mechanism getting stuck in the mast. How many people have ever had trouble with a roller furling jenny in heavy wind, trying to pull on the cord and bring it in? Probably a lot of people. The boat next to me had a problem, and that's why they dropped out the race.
Yeah, I read an article about the main being overpowered, and they tried to pull it in, and she stuck, jammed.
So I have a roller flow main, and you can't turn it up under pressure.
Yeah.
But
So you have to come up into the wind to do it.
which you may not be able to do under, or easily under some wind conditions. So if you do have a roller furling main, it's probably really good to come up with a routine maintenance that you do on it to make sure that all the bearings are lubricated, that
Even if they are, you're not gonna
It's
burn
not-
it up under pressure. It's just not doable.
Yeah.
It's not about any of those things, it's just not made to do that.
So then, with that in mind, and what Court's saying is that his boat has got a roller furling main, and under any kind of wind load, he can't furl it. That means that, Court, you have to make the decision early on to roll that thing up.
Yep.
And, but as long as you're, have that in mind and are prepared to do that and do it, then it should be okay. Brian, did you have it?
I think you've got to look at the context that you're sailing in. Are you racing, or if you get caught in the conditions we were caught in, to heck with the race, kick the engine on. You know,
That's what I would have to do.
Right,
Yeah.
you come up into the wind and then.
By the way, it's
That
not
might
a
work.
racing boat, so.
So that plays into the
Yeah,
picture.
what Brian is saying is that whether you're racing or cruising does play into how you're going to do that. If you're cruising and you've got the room, you can ease off. You don't have to be sailing close hauled. If you have room, you can just ease off. You can start the engine. You can do things like that. And that's a very good point. So, and the other thing that you can do is just drop the main completely. You can reduce headsail size by changing to a smaller headsail on boats that are rigged to do that. Partly furling the headsail if you have a roller furling system available. Or you can drop the sail completely, but a caution with that is make sure it doesn't go overboard. I have seen jibs go overboard on big boats that are going 8 to 10 knots through the water, and that is not a pretty sight, especially if it's in the middle of the night in a rough thing. On my boat, I always have a sail tie up in the bow, so that if I do lower the jib, I can tie it so it doesn't go overboard. And so that's a big concern. For reefing them, a whole bunch of people aren't familiar with reefing the main on their boats. So I found these pictures on the internet and wanted to go over it because it's really such a simple operation. Everybody should be able to do this in their sleep, basically. There's only 4 steps to it. The first one is to ease the main halyard so that the reefing tack can fit on a hook or be tied up at the mast. What I did sailing with the Navy last summer is I had them mark the halyard with a spot so that they would ease it out until that spot was available to make sure there was plenty slack in it, because you want to do this really quickly. So you ease the main halyard, then you connect the tack. And this boat has a ring up here in the tack and a hook at the gooseneck, and all you have to do is hook the ring on the gooseneck, and then step 3 is tighten the halyard back up. This end of the sail is flapping around, not doing anything. The 4th step is to tighten the clew, and this boat has a line that is fixed at the end of the boom, goes through the clew outhole, comes down to a block, and goes forward. The one on the other side is a little bit different rig, and it has a line that's hooked to the main for the clew and goes aft, so you don't have to leave the cockpit. And then the clew outhole, or the clew outhole line, is also going back to the cockpit. So you can presumably ease the main halyard, pull this down, tie it off, pull the main halyard tight again, and then pull this one down, and then you're done, possibly without leaving the cockpit. Not all boats are rigged that way, but that's just an idea.
Because I always struggled with that, because I tried to get them the same before I went back up. I didn't know that.
You gotta do the halyard, get
First.
the halyard down, hook it
I
on,
did not
get it
go
back
back
up.
Yeah.
So the difference is that schematic does not show a topping lift.
No, no.
Now, you don't want, if you don't have a topping lift, then you end up your booms in the cockpit and beat the hell out of your crew.
That's a very good point,
So
Brian.
you gotta,
Okay.
Yes, and I've never sailed on a big boat that did not have a topping
right,
lift. And,
it's not a schematic.
yeah, so what Brian is saying, that this schematic doesn't show the boom having a topping lift. So it's crucial that when you ease that main halyard off, that the end of the boom be supported some sort of way. Lots of boats have boom vangs which will hold the boom up, and that may be satisfactory. But this is something you should know about your boat, is how it's going to do this.
Skip right in.
Yes.
On your first example, aren't you gonna have to release your outhaul? Because as that thing comes down, that cradle where you're gonna reef it is forward of where it was. Theoretically, if it's heavy air, you got your outhaul pulled tight anyway, so you're gonna have to let that go, right?
No, you leave it there. This block is really in the wrong position. It should be further forward so that it's pulling closer to straight down, maybe just a little bit aft. So this should come down and be clear of the outhaul car. There's another picture that shows that a little bit better. But don't ease that off because
You'll never get it back.
you'll never get it back. It takes time to do it. And some people think that they don't have to rig some kind of line back there because they're going to get to the end of the boom and tie this in with a sail tie or something. I would not do that unless I had body armor on and stuff, because this end of the boom is going to be flying around the whole time. Like Brian said, you don't want it in the cockpit. So you need to have something that you can remotely pull this down with.
So I have another question.
Yes,
My sail has 2 reef points.
yes.
So what if I wanted to have, because I hear it all the time, you reef early and then you can shake it, it's easier to shake it out, right? So how does that fit into that diagram? If I needed to do a double reef early, because I thought we're gonna get 30 knots of wind again, and at some point I wanna shake off that first reef, how does it catch the,
All right, so
I
Al's,
wanna shake off the, you know,
the
the
first
second
reef.
reef.
So
And let it
Al's
go.
question is what if I have two lines of reef points? This diagram only shows one line of reef points. And the upper reef point should have the same type of equipment. So what you do is just like we're gonna leave the outhaul pull all the way back,
Yep.
we're gonna leave the first reef in place. There should be 2 hooks on your boom. One for the first reef, one for the second reef. And the next picture shows that, but you're just going to do the same thing again. These 4 steps: ease the halyard, get the new one, the new tack down here, either tie it in or hook it on a hook, retighten the halyard, and then bring the new reef outhaul down. And then just go through that process in reverse, because you may want to shake the second reef. Now, some people racing don't like to rig all the reefing lines. They may have 3 reef points. They don't want all those lines dragging on the sail. So most of the time, on a boat with 3 lines, we did not reef the second and third, or run the second and third. We just did the first one. But we had a messenger line that went through them. It was just a loop. And what we could do was we could tie the reef line to the messenger line and then pull it through and then bring it back down to the boom. Of course, that's something that you'd have to do early before the boom starts moving around the boats and not over the water. But in most sailing we do, I don't think that one reef line in place is going to make any kind of significant difference in your speed. But
The thing is, through shaking out the reef, I mean, again, looking at racing and cruising, or racing and dropping out the reef, to hoist that sail back up, racing, and you've got pressure on the main, you're gonna have to have some really good, clean sail slides. You're almost gonna have to luff to take the pressure off the main to hoist.
Well, Brian's raised a good question, if you can't hear it in Zoom world, is when you shake the reef and you need to hoist the main, it's going to be difficult to do it if your sail slides aren't in good. What I do is I left the main completely at that point.
And that gives you the workability to deal with the other stuff too.
And my boat has got sliding cars on a metal track. I lubricated those with Johnson's paste wax at the beginning of the season, which has helped a whole bunch. Rod Stevens, the sailor from the 20s and 30s and stuff said that the thing that you did for that was put anhydrous lanolin on it, that was in the 30s before all the other kinds of lubes we have right now, but that is something that should be lubricated, and you can do it periodically, and it
Yeah,
makes
I
a
had,
big-
the group I'm part of, I recommend Sail Coat as a lubricant, dry lubricant.
Al's saying use something called sail coat. I've heard of that, I've never used it, but the point is that everyone's recognizing the need to lubricate the cars on the foot of the sail and on the mast. Brian?
Bicycle dry Teflon lube, same stuff for about a third the price.
Now you tell me.
Bicycle, Brian is suggesting bicycle dry Teflon lube is, chain lube is a good
Same
alternative.
stuff.
Yeah, you don't want to use the chain lube I have in mind, which is a greasy mess. So let me go on to this next picture, which is a detail of a gooseneck on a boat. These lines that are run through the gooseneck, the horns here, don't have anything to do with reefing. This picture was taken just to show what the gooseneck looks like. So this is a typical arrangement where there are two reefing horns or hooks, one on either side of the boom, so that you can quickly bring that hook down, put it in here, get the halyard up. Sometimes on some boats, people have trouble holding the eye on this hook until the halyard gets tight. So an alternative to that is shown in the other picture. On this boat, what they've done, instead of using a hook, is they've made a short piece of a non-stretch rope, like Dyneema. They fastened one end of it to an eye on one side of the mast. They've put a snap shackle on it, and when the reefing tack comes down, they quickly run the snap shackle through there and snap it into an eye on the other side, and then bring it back up. So that's not going to get loose. And with using a non-stretch rope, you don't have to worry about it moving up and down very much. So that's an alternative. You could use a stout rope and do the same thing if you don't have Dyneema. Or you could even use a good sail tie for something like that as an alternative if you have problems with the getting on the hook. The next picture shows what to do with the reefing outhaul line at the end of the boom if you don't have some kind of fixed thing already on the boom to tie the end to. And so you can see that this is a reefing line that goes forward through the boom. It comes out of a sheave and the end of the boom goes up through the reefing kringle and then comes down. And there's a right way and a wrong way to tie this. The right way is to loop it under the sail, bring it under the boom, and then tie a bowline in it. The wrong way is to have it go under the boom and then come back and tie the eye in it. I am not sure why the wrong way is wrong, but I've seen this in more than one description, so I'm only going to use this method.
I have bowling up in the ring, so I shouldn't be doing that.
The bowline in here?
Yeah.
No, so if you go down here, you're getting a 2-to-1 mechanical advantage to
Okay.
pull this down, whereas if you just tie it into here, you're getting a 1-to-1.
Gotcha.
So that line is pulling directly down.
This,
Right.
It's pulling directly down. So you're pinning the ferrule right down on top of the boom.
Gotcha.
and the, David, the question that you asked about where it should come to, they're drawing a 90-degree angle here to try and show that this line should be coming straight down. It would probably be okay to put it a little bit farther aft to try and have an outhaul effect to pull some of the draft out of the sail. But I was reading in an article about this also. If you keep your outhaul tight, it's going to be pulling some of the draft. It'll pull the draft out partway up the sail. So that'll give you a head start on getting it here at this point. Any questions about this?
So you prepared this before, right?
Yes.
You're not out in the rain and the wind trying to do this.
Right,
Okay.
so what we're doing, you look at the weather forecast, you think you know what the weather's gonna be. I would say always have the first reef rigged.
Rigged, okay.
Maybe at night, if you're doing an overnight race, have the second reef rigged. I don't think that this is gonna add 3 seconds per mile to your speed.
That rig looks more like what's called a flattening rig. That would just pull about the bottom foot of the sail, where the tack point remains fixed, don't mess with that. And that's just gonna pull your sail very flat and take about a foot, maybe 18 inches off the back end of the boom. And let the boom rise with it. And that looks like what that is.
Yeah, Brian's saying that this diagram that we're looking at right now looks like a flattening reef, and it does look like that. I've sailed on boats with flattening reefs, and it's like, it flattens the lower part of the
Yeah,
sail more than the
you're
outroll
just
can.
Depowering the sail, really.
Yes, but the principle, though, is the same.
Yeah, correct.
So if you had more shivs and you had a flattening reef, and I haven't seen flattening reefs in sails lately, but it would be the same, you'd go through the same thing. And I have sailed on boats that do not have an eye on the boom or something to hook the end of the reefing line to, so this is the way that you have to do it. So, any other discussion about this? The next picture shows the mainsail after it's been reefed. And there's a couple of things that I want to point out. A lot of times, well, first of all, this big round rolled up sail is a big drag thing. If I was racing this boat, I would roll the front end up a little bit tighter if I could. Something that they have done right here is they've used a sail tie to tie the reef in, to tie this rolled up thing in, that is contrasts with the color of the sail. That is very important if you're sailing at night, because you don't want to be trying to pull up the main with sail tie still in, or there's a good chance you may tear something. Here's a white sail tie, and you can see that it looks just like the sail. You can barely see it, but the blue one stands out. If I had a black sail, then maybe the white one would be fine. But with white, and I know to use blue ones the hard way, from having torn the sail and pulling up the mast, not taking them all off. Another thing that this shows is that this reef is properly tied in by going under the foot of the sail, not around the boom. If you tie it around the boom and something comes loose, you're guaranteed almost to tear your sail. So if, because all the force is going to be on the reefing cringle, which is not nearly as strong as other points of the sail. So the little round things in the sail with holes in them are just to loop around the bottom of the sail to wrap this up. They are not to try and tie the sail to the boom.
How do they get that sail tied through the sail?
Well, there's a hole in the sail.
Okay.
If you look between the two, you'll see little holes, spaced every 1.5 feet maybe.
Okay.
And there's a little
Okay.
diamond thing with a hole in it. And so when the sail comes down, then you've got to get on the cabin top or wherever and put the line through there. But don't tie it under the boom, just tie it under the sail. So, any questions about the stuff that we talked about on the procedure of reefing? Because I know from being around that there's a lot of people who have not reefed their boats enough to be comfortable with doing it. I recommend doing it on a flat, calm day to just go through and get the procedure down so that you're completely comfortable with it, and then try it when the breeze picks up, and then you'll know how your boat's going to perform with the reefed main. So this is some of the stuff that we talked about before. Why didn't more boats, or maybe any boats, shorten sail during the race? factors that go into that is speed of which the wind built up. It was really quick. Crew safety concerns. We had 20 to 30 knot wind, large waves. It was dark and overcast. We didn't want to send people out of the cockpit. Probably nobody had jack lines rigged, and harnesses weren't used. A jack line, if you're not familiar with it, is a line, a piece of heavy strap or line that you put on deck so that you can put a safety harness on with a tether, hook the tether into the jack line, and then go up and down the length of the boat so that if you do fall overboard, you remain attached to the boat. I use those on the Round the Lake race, the Gulfport to Pensacola race, and things like that, and use harnesses on my boat. But I did not do it for this, and the next time I do a nighttime race, I will do that, because then I might have put Gigi on the helm, and I would have gone up and done the, lowered the main, because I would be comfortable with her steering the boat and me going up forward to do the main because I'm hooked on.
Right.
But I don't want her to be put in the situation where I go overboard and she has to figure out how to come back and get me. I'd rather her be overboard and me figure out how to go get her. That's a joke.
So, I have something to say about the jack
That's the way we
lines.
did it.
I put jack lines on my boat, and then I wear a harness, but then I focus on my life jacket, which had a plastic connection. And so if you're gonna do that, you really should have a life jacket that's got the steel rings.
Yes.
Because when you go overboard on that jack line hooked in, it's just gonna snap that piece of plastic, and you're gonna watch the boat and your harness and your life jacket sail off away from you.
Yeah, Al just brought up the point, if you didn't hear it in Zoom world, that if you're using jack lines and a tether, your harness has to be substantial enough so that the tether can hook into the steel rings on the harness. And, because otherwise, you're just kind of kidding yourself because it's gonna break. There's a tremendous amount, if the boat's, when you're going over, swim call is when you go off the boat in calm water. When you do it to go overboard, it's because you didn't expect to do it, the boat's pitching around, and you're gonna get in the water, and the boat's gonna be going 6, 7 knots. That plastic is gonna disintegrate instantaneously. The harness, if it's an offshore type harness that's designed to take that, it's gonna pull you along, but then you have to be concerned about, is it pulling me underwater? Do I make the decision to release myself from it to keep from drowning? And the important part about that is make sure that the quick release shackle on that harness is the one that's hooked to you and not the one that's hooked to the boat. Brian?
I've been interrupting you a lot. This is the last
Well,
one.
and I was hoping that we'd have some discussion.
But
because I think-
two true stories. Racing in a boat, long time ago, there was, I think, a Mardi Gras regatta. Somebody went overboard. Alcohol was probably involved. As he went over, he was grabbed by the feet and ended up being dragged by his feet face down beside the boat. Now that you probably have done better, let him go, okay? The second story,
So he was waterboarded alongside the
yeah,
boat.
was face down, he dragged.
Tell me the truth.
Water before somebody knows, okay? Step up. The second story, and I get a true story, my cousin, many, many years ago, Gulfport, Pensacola race, nighttime, lost the race.
Lost the rig.
Shroud broke, everything went overboard.
Wow.
Rough. The end of the mast started ramming the side of the boat.
Oh, boy.
They had cutters and board and everything, they went through all of this and had on safety harnesses, everybody tethered on. As they cut the mast loose and the mast drifted away, started to sink, took one of the crew with them.
Oh,
They were shackled to something
yeah.
on the rig. He actually went under, it took him under, and was able to disengage and pop back up.
Oh, that's good.
But Again, we talk about jack lines, we talk about shackling on, we talk, but, you know.
So before we move, what Brian has talked about, two incidents where people got in the water and then they had problems in the water. One by being dragged face down by the feet alongside the boat, and then the other guy was attached to the sinking mast or that
Shackled
got
on to something that went.
disconnected from the boat.
Disconnected from the boat.
What you have to do in thinking about where you hook on if you go forward is, am I hooking onto something that is not going to become a worse hazard to me? And definitely do not hook onto lifelines, because that's kind of the weakest link also.
And I'm not making a plug for West Marine, but West Marine right now is doing 25% off of their Mustang offshore life jacket, which has those steel rings.
Yeah.
So that's a good buy.
Yeah, I did not want to get into life jackets for this because there are, there's just so many variables there. But it is a life jacket, and if you're in the ocean, you want to, if you have the choice, you probably have the best one that you can get. I'm going to sail with the Navy starting again in 2 weeks, and what they're going to make me do, and I'm okay with this, is wear a big Mustang jacket that's self-inflating, has a water-activated light on it, and it has an AIS in it. An indicator so that it's water-activated, so that if I do go in the water, it's immediately going to broadcast my position, which will show up on the boat's AIS indicator and on the navigation chart to help them come back and find me. That thing it's almost as bad as a Mae West life jacket, if you're familiar with those. But it is a lifesaver if you go in the water. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can get with life jackets, and it depends upon what kind of boat you're sailing, what kind of conditions you're going to sail it in. But you definitely don't want plastic connections to the jack line and the harness tether if you're going out outside of Lake Pontchartrain, and I wouldn't use that in Lake
Or even
Pontchartrain.
handling a boat when you're trying to
Yes.
do that
yes.
by yourself.
Question? No?
I was gonna say, I know they make the life jackets, the inflatables that keep you, face up if it's dragging you. They're supposed to make their, I don't know what brand they are.
All of them are supposed to do that. And the question is, will they keep you face up? They're supposed to do that. The life jackets have different ratings on how many pounds of buoyancy they have. And last year, before sailing with the Navy, I did the online U.S. Sailing Safety at Sea seminar. And there were people talking about all kinds of things I'd never thought about life jackets. And which ones are better, which for maneuverability, getting around the boat, this, that, and the other. There's a whole bunch of information about life jackets. If you're thinking about buying a new one, I recommend that you do some research to get one that's dependable and that you can move around with. There's lots of really good ones. West Marine has good ones, but there's a lot of them. So. All right, any other questions about that? All right, so now we're going to move over to the last thing, crew overboard. And I'm going to do some ocean sailing this summer again, which I enjoy doing. I'm going to go up to Maine. There's two things, there's really only one thing that concerns me about doing that. I've done trips like that before, and it's the weather. The weather, the boat's a very strong boat, but the weather can overpower any kind of boat. And what happens when you get in bad weather? The chance of someone going overboard increases. And the worst case scenario, my worst nightmare, is trying to recover someone at night in 6 to 10 foot seas. So the whole idea is to stay on the boat. But if someone does go overboard, you as a skipper on a boat and as a crew member on a boat should know in your mind what you're going to do, because time is of the essence. And here in warm water, we do not have to worry as much about hypothermia as people do in colder waters. But but the person may be injured, and you need to get back to them quickly. So preparation is an important part, having the right gear on board and knowing how to use it. the recovery philosophy about what you're going to do. I'm going to talk about the quick stop procedure. And then the other thing that it takes is training and practice. If you're the only one on your boat who knows how to do a man overboard recovery, and you're the one who goes overboard, you've got a lot of problems to worry about. So everyone who sails in the Pensacola race is supposed to do a man overboard drill or discussion before the start of the race, also the race to Gulfport. Some of those are very superficial, some are more detailed. But this actually, as someone who has gotten his feet and head wet a couple of times, it's something I take pretty seriously. So for the preparation, everyone should have a PFD that they can get to. And Albert Baque and I were talking about this. Maybe what, because we've been pretty lax. Some people make people wear PFDs on their boats when they leave the dock, and I have no objection to that at all. I think that you can't argue with that. If you don't have the PFD on when you're on the boat, then where is the PFD and how quickly can you get to it? If you're on someone else's boat, do you know where their PFDs are? And what if the last person who used it was about half your size? So now you can't get it on. So Albert and I were saying maybe what we ought to do is say either you bring your own PFD, and I've suggested that for the moon, like the full moon race.
Check your cable,
Yeah, the cable. Let me know.
keep it in.
Yeah.
Do I need enough different cable?
No signal. But
Try this one.
so anyway, you should have a PFD that is,
But I think to ask people, I mean, you know, I have an offshore one that I got from Pensacola that's little, because you're not gonna ask somebody to wear their regular jacket, or you can, but like, if it's 110 degrees outside, like it was today, and you go sailing, I mean, you're gonna die of heat stroke before you go overboard, you know, so maybe, like, you can have a little inflatable one that's not as hot or as big.
there we go.
Yeah, they're not as big as those like ski jackets where it surrounds your entire chest.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, the two in the front that's inflatable with the strapping.
But this, cause like, I'd wear my full rig to go, you know, it's blowing whatever it is out there now, we got, you know, nice
Yeah,
big
it's actually
rigs.
gone down.
You know, but as far as like, if I'm just going out on a day sail, you know, let's go out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I mean, so I think maybe people think that they can only have one kind of life jacket, and you can have a bunch. Oh, Scott has something to say, Scott Kaiser has something to say. Go ahead, Scott. Let me see if I can unmute him. This is what happens when you don't work from home. Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Can you hear Scott? You say? Can you hear Scott?
I can. Yes.
Scott is suggesting to make the reasonable amount, so like, you're not gonna make your tether. people.
Yeah.
Okay, your tether should go from the floor to the main, where you have that much distance to
Well,
move
yeah.
around.
If you didn't hear what Scott's saying, he said that if your tether should be relatively short, because if you have too long a tether, then that in itself can cause problems, and that's true. But the tethers that I used sailing last summer, it was a double tether. There was a short length and there was a long length, and so that enabled you to remain hooked on with one of the two tethers as you moved up and down the deck on the boat. And there are some places where you kind of had to use the long tether, which is working around the mast. If you have a very short tether and you're working at the mast, and you have to go on one side to do something and then come around, get away and grind a winch or something. If you have too short a tether, you just can't do it. But that is a good point. You just have to get the right one. I think a lot of them just come in standard lengths, and I don't think I've ever seen one longer than 6 feet, but there may be some of those. But that is something that you should look at and be aware of, and get the one that you think is appropriate for your boat. Also, the jack lines have to be pretty strong, because if you think about, let's say you have a person who weighs 200 pounds, they go over the side and now they're moving through the water at 7 knots when that tether pulls tight. The tether may hold, but is the jack line going to hold? And the jack line needs to be strong enough to handle probably 2 people on it, because that's a possibility. Another thing that I think is important is suitable footwear. A lot of people like to wear flip-flops on the boat, and that's okay, getting ready for swim call, but in the weather that we had the other night, I would want everybody who gets out of the cockpit to have non-skid shoes on that have a toe that gives them some protection so they don't get caught on everything that sticks up out of the deck. Going forward on the boat in that kind of weather is kind of like mountain climbing or rock climbing, I think, and you wouldn't go rock climbing in flip-flops. So that's my thought on that. The next thing is the man overboard function on your GPS. Most GPSs, either handhelds or ones that are installed in the boat, have a way that you can push a button or push the screen and record the location so that you can navigate back to it using your GPS. You should know how to do that, and the people that sail with you should know how to do that. You should have a crew briefing before you get underway and establish rules for being on deck going forward, when we're going to wear harnesses, when we're not. Next thing is recovery philosophy. And I called it this, I don't know what to say really, but I think that part of the idea of what happens when someone goes overboard is to immediately throw a flotation device overboard, whether they're wearing one or not. So not only does that mark a position to you on the boat, but if they don't have one, then it gives something they could swim to. Minimize the distance from the crew overboard. You don't want to turn the boat away when you're a mile past them, because it's going to take a long time to get back and you might lose them. Get the crew overboard connected to the boat when you get close to them, because to go circle around and try 2 or 3 times to get connected to them is a hard thing. And the easy way to get connected to them, one, is using the life sling device that lots of boats have. That's probably the most effective. I've never actually used one, but when I watch the videos of it and see how it works, it makes the most sense of all. Or have a floating throwing line that you can have. There's some of those that are made up so that you have one end tied to the boat, of course, and you just throw it out there. The line pays out as it's going out, and then the whole thing floats, and the person can come over and grab onto it. And then what may be the hardest thing is getting the person back on the boat. And we'll talk about that briefly at the end.
So I would add one more thing.
Sure.
Someone of that crew has got to be assigned to keep an eye on the person overboard, while everybody else moves the boat to turn it around.
I'm gonna get to that. That's a very important point. That probably should go on here. And what Al is saying is that if a person goes overboard, and it's typically the person who sees them go overboard becomes the pointer, and then that person should point at the person overboard to help the helmsman go back and get them, and have no other duties until relieved of those duties by another pointer or something like that. And what the pointer should do is move to a position in the forward part of the cockpit so that the helmsman can look at the sails, look at the crew, and also see which way the pointer is pointing. Because you don't want the pointer behind you, because then the helmsman's got to keep looking around. And so I have a question for you. How long will it take you to stop the boat's travel from the time a person goes overboard?
Depends on how well you like that.
That's a good point. But if you like the person, assuming you do,
Going back.
you take 5 seconds,
No, more than
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
that. No,
Now, I hope it's quicker than that, but more than a minute?
Yeah.
I would say, yeah.
Say, more than a minute?
Between 3 and
I
5.
think as a skipper, you have to call a tack or a jibe, turn the motor on, and immediately turn that boat around, headed back to them on the same tack.
Okay, I like Al's approach. I want you on board if I go overboard. Sorry, Gigi. But no, that's what I think is what we want to do. Not everyone agrees with how you should do this. There's a lot of philosophies, but this is the way that I learned how to do it. How far will you travel in 1 minute at 6 knots? There's a rule of thumb that I'm going to show you in just a second. Here's the answer.
100 yards?
In
600 feet.
6 knots, a boat will travel 600 feet in 1 minute. This is called the 1 minute rule. You take the speed of the boat or ship, add 2 zeros in it, and that's how many feet it will go in 1 minute. The 3 minute rule, which is related to this, is you take the speed of the boat, add 2 zeros to that, and that's how many yards it will go in 3 minutes. And we used to use the 3 minute rule for navigating in piloting waters on the ship all the time. But this 1 minute thing, if the person goes overboard and you're going 6 knots, and almost every boat that sails with us is capable of going 6 knots when there's a good breeze, will go 600 feet, 2 football lengths in 1 minute. So if it takes you 5 minutes to get back, that person's head is almost over the horizon, especially if you have any kind of sea. So then the question is I like Al's approach, let's stop the boat immediately, but how do we do that? Is there a way that you can safely do it? And there is. And this is how the quick stop procedure works. These are what, for quick stop, this is what I think are the immediate actions. And they don't have to all be done in any order, they just need to be done as quickly as possible. First thing, crew overboard, man overboard, person overboard, whatever you want. Throw a flotation device to them, and then the helmsman tacks the boat without releasing the jib to basically heave to. And so you can do that almost immediately. The pointer, and Al brought this up, points at the crew overboard until relieved from that position, until relieved, and he goes to a position forward of the helmsman so that the helmsman can see. Typically, the person who sees the crew go overboard is the pointer, because that person sees them and that's where they are. What if it's the best helmsman? Do you want that person to be the pointer forever? Probably not. But then have someone else relieve the pointer who's capable of doing the pointer, and then the best helmsman gets on the helm. But this needs to be done fairly quickly. So let's say that you have the best helmsman becomes the pointer. Well, if everyone knows that the second step is to tack the boat, then anybody basically can tack the boat and not release the jib. Then, when you get in, so then you deploy, when you tack the boat and don't release the jib, you've automatically gotten into a hove-to position. You may be bouncing around, but you're not moving in the water. You have a second to regroup. You can deploy the crew overboard pole, light, whatever other stuff you want to put in the water, and make sure you mark your GPS positions. Now, someone's going to say, but wait, I got the spinnaker up. We're going 8 knots. What do you want? You want me to tack the boat with the spinnaker up? And we talked about, is it more important to tear the sails than to recover the person? I have tacked the boat with the spinnaker up doing man overboard drills with a quick stop. Not in 20 knots of wind, but I've done it in 5 to 10 knots of wind. And what happens is the chute just plasters up against the rigging, and it stops, and you can pull it down. If there's more wind than that, and you've got a boat with a pole, ease the pole up to the headstay, and then do a quick takedown. If you have an asymmetric chute, I've never done this with an asymmetric chute, but it's more like a jib than a spinnaker in some ways, so maybe you just tack it up. I would want to practice with someone else's spinnaker and see how it works.
So I saw a depiction, you know, if you've got somebody in the water, what's the easiest way to get them out of the water? Is to run a line from a bow cleat to a stern cleat, so that when you come up alongside them, they actually have something to step on.
Yes, well, let's talk about that in a second, but that is one of the really good ways to do it. And so we'll bring that up again.
Okay.
So the whole point, whether you got the spinnaker up or whether you're under some kind of headsail, is to stop the boat's forward movement as quickly as possible. Partly, that really helps the person in the water, because she doesn't see the boat going over the horizon for 5 or 10 minutes before you turn around. They see the boat stop immediately, stuff getting out in the water, and that's very reassuring to the person in the water. Then, the boat is probably less than 2 football fields from the boat, and then you can figure out how you're going to go back and do it. What do you do after you've done that? Supplemental action, and this doesn't have to be done in a particular order, some of it might, but if you want to make a VHF radio call, that's the time to do that. Steer in a circle with the crew overboard, a beam to position for a windward pickup. So I'm going to show you a diagram of this and a video which will make more sense. But you want to tack the boat, and that, in theory, is going to put you close to being to windward of the boat, of the person, or at least equal to them. So then you sail around to windward of them, then you turn downwind as the jib is being blanketed by the mainsail. When you ease the mainsail out, you drop the jib on deck and make sure it's out of the way. You jibe the boat, and then you come up to leeward of them on a close reach, so that then with the main you can control the boat speed. I would start the engine and have it out of gear after I made sure that there were no lines in the water in case I needed the engine. So what do you do if you're the person that's in the water? Well, the first thing is do not panic, because you're sailing, this is your lucky day, you got in the water, but you're sailing with a crew who has practiced the quick stop method or some other good method, and they know how to come back and get you. Obtain flotation. Either your PFD, if it doesn't auto-inflate, if it's an inflatable one, start blowing it up, or if they have thrown a cushion or something over, swim to that cushion, hold on to the cushion. If you're lucky, if it's at night and someone's thrown a strobe light over, go to the strobe light. That way it's much easier for the boat to see where you are in the water. Some foul weather gear has a hood that is a bright color white or something. White's not so good because if you've got breaking waves, it goes in with the foam. But it gets you back. Put something on that will show where you are. If you need to make sounds, use a whistle. Because if you just try and yell, your voice is not going to carry that well. But if you have a whistle, you can easily, without expending a whole lot of energy, blow in the whistle. But don't use a police whistle with a ball in it, because as soon as water gets in that little round part, it quits working, which will be as soon as you go in the water. So there's plenty non-moving part whistles that work really well.
Well, and Amazon's got little water-activated lights, strobe lights that attach to a PFD, so that if it goes in the water, it automatically activates.
And that's a very good thing.
If you're racing at night, you should, everybody should have something like that on.
Yes, yes, because if you get hurt or whatever, you want stuff to work automatically as much as possible. And then the other thing that the person in the water should do is conserve heat and energy. We don't have to worry about the heat as much as other places, but we still need to worry about it. This is going to be a video of a boat doing the quick stop. And it only takes about 2 minutes, and this will give you a better idea of what it looks like. Let me show you this diagram. It's a little faint, but this is how to do it with if you have a life buoy thing. I can't think of the name of it right now. You know, the overboard thing with the line that's attached to the boat.
Life
So,
sling thing?
life sling, yes. So here, the person goes overboard. You're sailing up like that. The person goes up overboard. They drop the life. They throw a PFD or something to them, and they go up here, do just like we talked about. They tack, leave the jib back, and now they let the life sling out behind them. They start sailing away, and they come back, jibe, should take their jib down, but now they're coming up, and the life sling is going inside of the circle. And what they're going to do is they're going to drag the life sling past the person in the water. And to me, this is a really good way because you don't have to get the boat right next to the person when you're maneuvering it for him to get in contact. Because if I was in the water, I would much rather be in contact 20 feet behind the boat with the life sling than 5 feet away watching the boat go by. So this, I think, is a really good way. And then this is one of the best ways to get the person out of the water because the life sling is made strong enough that you can use the line on it to hoist the people out of the water. So this diagram illustrates the circle for the quick stop, the basic motion that the boat's going through, but also how you would use the life sling.
So I read that you were supposed to, when somebody goes overboard, you want to pick them up on the leeward side so they don't get beat up against the boat. But the first video showed them picking them up on the windward side.
Yes, that is a big point of discussion. And actually, this little video that I showed you before,
What's the windward side?
I have a link to that on the handout and it's set out. And if you look at the comments to it, that is one of the comments to it. And so the idea is the leeward side of the boat is going to be closer to the water.
Yes.
And so it's easier to get the person on board.
And you shelter them from the water as well.
The problem is that there have been more incidents where a person has been killed by the boat drifting over them than there have been by people killed by not being able to be recovered over the windward side.
Okay.
And that's the reason. The Naval Academy has a guy who was their offshore safety guru, and his job is to go research all of this stuff and things. And the consensus as of last summer, through U.S. sailing and a whole bunch of people, was it may be easier under some conditions to pick them up on the leeward side, but there is a big risk of the boat being blown over them and them getting underneath the boat or just pounded by the boat. Whereas if they're on the windward side, you can get a line to them or something and then maybe control it better.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about the wave action. The wave action is going to pick the boat up and sling it.
Yes, so that is something where I think that there can't be a hard and fast rule about it, and that is something that the person doing the recovery is going to have to use the best judgment under what the conditions are, what are the things. But my boat has an off-center propeller on the port side. I would not want to, if I needed the engine to pick the person up, I wouldn't want them on the port side because then they're in the propeller. Because of the long keel in the boat, if they're on the starboard side, they're not getting anywhere near the propeller. So I would always prefer a starboard side recovery if I'm going to be using the engine. So these are things, that if you practice doing it, you will see what works best for your boat, what works best, and you just see how the boat reacts, because all the boats are gonna react differently. And now, I forgot to put in the stuff that Al brought up, is how do you get the person back on board? And this is a really tough thing. Al's made this point, which I've heard other people say, where you take a line, like a jib sheet, a good sized line, you hook one end to the bow, you let it go in the water, and then you bring it up through like the spinnaker block, and then to a winch. So the line's tight, the person can get on it, and if it's down in the water, they can maybe grab the side of the boat, or a line that you put over, and put their feet on that line. Then, with the end that's hooked up to the winch, you can start tightening the line, and that's going to lift them up. Another thing that's real easy for me to do on my boat is to, since I have a mizzen mast with a staysail halyard on it, it's real easy to use that halyard as a lifting point to lift someone out of the water. What we did on a boat once was we put a boom vang, a rope boom vang, a tackle, on the boom, and then we swung the boom out over the water and lifted the person up with the boom. The topping lift, which we had on the boat, is holding the end of the boom up, and you lift the person up in the water, from the water. If you have that boom vang tackle, you can hook it to something else. You can use that to help pull the person out. If you have a ladder, that may be the simplest thing. On Albert Baquet's boat, he's got a ladder in the stern, so really all he has to do is fold it out, and someone conceivably could climb up. What if the person's injured? Then you're going to have all kinds of other considerations. Then another one is, do you put a person in the water with the already one person in the water?
I was gonna ask that, what if somebody's unconscious?
Well, then you've got to do the best you can do. Brian?
Simple, just float behind them and yell shark.
Get them even more motivated. The unconscious person in the water is a big factor. What if the person got injured going overboard? They dislocated their shoulder or something like that. Then they're going to be absolutely no help to get back on the boat, or got hit in the head and the life jacket's holding them up.
Well, see, and I had a guy in my men's group that worked for the Coast Guard, and it's a misnomer. Most people think that when I go overboard, I'm gonna be okay, I'm gonna be able to swim. But if you're unable to swim, incapacitated, knocked out, you sink first. And it's not till days later when the body starts to decompose, it comes back up.
Well,
I got one better for you. What if you're a two-man boat and the person that goes overboard is unconscious? What do you do then?
You guys have-
It's something to think. I mean, we can what if it all day long.
well,
But for each scenario, each trip should be a safety topic of what if this happens with the manpower we have on board.
right. So there, for some of these things, there is no answer. And I've sailed with you guys a long time, and I know that you've got a lot of experience, and you're creative, and would come up on the spot with some solution to help do this. You would not give up. No one in here would do that. But the thing is, it's a lot easier if you have thought about it in advance. And the whole reason that we had this seminar tonight is because everyone I talked to said, you know, I wish I'd thought about what I was going to do before the race, and I had started the race off a little bit different. You know, it was like no harm, no foul type thing, but we dodged a bullet in some ways. Because if someone had gone overboard in that thing, it would have been a challenge to get them back. So the Safety at Sea seminar deal that I did, I thought it was really worthwhile. It was one completely online. I didn't have to get in the water. I could do it at my own pace. It's just watching videos and then taking a test afterward. The test's not that hard, but it raised a whole bunch of issues and made me think about things that I hadn't thought about in a long time. This is the references for the quick stop. This is the U.S. sailing procedure for quick stop. It's one of two procedures I think that they support. This is the video that I showed you so that you can watch it on your own. The person who does it acknowledges that it was invented in the U.S. And actually, I was teaching at the Naval Academy when we were involved in doing a whole bunch of the testing thing, including well, can we do this with the spinnaker up? And it turned out that we could, though I don't see anyone recommending doing that now. But having seen it work under the right conditions, I would not hesitate to tack the spinnaker if I thought that was the best way to stop the boat to pick someone up in the water. So for the conclusion, I want to say, hopefully now we have a good understanding of what went wrong with the weather, and it was a little bit more than the weather not reading the weather forecast and obeying it. But now I'm going to be on the lookout for strong winds coming from dissipating thunderstorms, whether they be 20 or 30 miles away. We talked about why, when, and how to shorten sail. I'm kind of from the philosophy that I like to shorten sail, because on Albert's boat a couple of years ago when we were sailing out in Lake Bourne, the breeze picked up. We reefed the mainsail, and the boat picked up almost a knot of speed. It stood up. We just took off. It was just slugging before we reefed. So I am an advocate for that. And we've talked about precautions to take for crew overboard and how to recover someone doing the quick stop method. There are other methods in the quick stop method, but what I like about the quick stop method is what Al said at the very beginning, is let's just figure out how to stop the boat right now. And when I do the sail training thing with the midshipmen, we spend 4 days in Chesapeake Bay reefing the boat, doing quick stops. Everybody on the boat takes the helm and does quick stops. We do them day and night. I've probably done 50 or 60 quick stops in my life, not with a real person in the water, but just a practice one, and I've seen it be an effective thing. So I'm an advocate for that. When I did the Safety at Sea seminar online, I saw that there are some other methods that people use on particular boats that aren't well adapted to doing the quick stop. Most of the boats that we have here, I think, are, but there are other methods that you may think are better for your boat and for your crew than doing the quick stop method. But what it does is it stops you close to the person that's in the water. And you have less worry about them being lost at night in 6-foot seas in the dark somewhere. Any questions?
No, I have one more comment.
Yeah.
On the full moon race, right before that wind hit us, the temperature dropped.
Yes.
Dropped drastically. And that should have been a telltale for all of us once we felt that, because we weren't anywhere close to a thunderstorm. Once we felt that change of temperature, that was it's coming.
Well, that's exactly right. Al's saying that a giveaway on what we were getting was the change in temperature when the wind first got to us, because it was so much cooler than the other temperature. That's because that wind had come from up at 30,000 feet with hail up there, that all that melted before it got down. The wind warmed up a little bit, but it was so cold and so heavy, so dense, that it just crashed down, splattered on the surface of the lake, and we got it. And so no, that's an important telltale thing, and I think that everybody will be conscious of that going forward. Any comments online or questions from anybody?
No, everybody's good.
Well, thank you all for sitting through this. I thought it was an important thing and something that we should talk about sooner rather than later, while the full moon race was fresh in everybody's mind. We're probably going to send out a survey form for this, and it takes only a couple of minutes to do it. But what we really like to get is feedback from these seminars to figure out how we can do them better.
That's
So,
awesome.
thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
It was good.